unless we changed it.
Oh, no, that was accurate.
That's it.
That is accurate?
That was a
Okay.
late retirement, resignation, yeah.
So we're going back. All right.
Right. So then with that, is there a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. The first item, correspondence and announcements. I don't have any. Do you have?
Just one announcement, we'll send this out in writing as well, but there's an event next Monday, the 29th, co-sponsored by a number of groups. There's community groups, Monona Cares and Cottage Grove Cares, with regard to some student AODA, prevention information. And so we are co-hosting the fact that we're using our facility here at the third floor conference room. And so information is being and has been distributed to parents, and it will be going out in our staff newsletter as well this week. And so we'll make sure that all the board members, if you haven't already, get that flyer as well. And we certainly would love your attendance if you're available to attend that night.
And could that be on the school website? So I guess if people get it, they'll know.
Actually, we are going to add it to the
Yeah,
website,
yeah.
and that's on our to-do list this week. So.
Well, and I just want to mention, and I'm guessing that many people saw it, and I know that there's a lot of articles about a lot of the Monona Grove kids in the Herald, but there was just a really nice article about a young woman who's a senior this year, who sang the national anthem at the football game. And it was a large article, so I'd encourage you to read it if you get a chance, because she talks about things that made a difference to her in the school district and in these programs. And it's just a great student story. So I would just encourage people to read that if they have an opportunity. The other thing I was going to mention was I had the opportunity to take a tour of a business this week, Monday morning, and discussed with them about opportunities to partner with students, and they were kind of excited about it. And this is an incredible little business that makes incredible science, has incredible science work. So that's an opportunity we're going to look at. And we have actually received, several of us have received calls from, and I know Dan has already met with them at Alto Leopold, about building educational experiences, and their research on how that improves student learning is just excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just some things hopefully we can get in the works. I just wanted to let you know.
Anyone else? Okay.
Sure. Any of our principals?
Yeah. I have a couple things to share. This past Sunday, we had a free little library installed in our community garden by Girl Scouts. And they were Nora Burdell, Kelsey Marca, and Tiffany Lofgren. So if you have a chance to look at it, it's really great. They built it themselves, and it really is a nice addition to our community garden, so it was a service project for them. We also received a thank you from the Second Harvest Food Bank, again, to our community garden because of the summer donations. We donated a lot of produce to the Second Harvest. And then just a reminder that Greg Sensala is in Finland as a teacher and representing both our school and the UW Science Compass program. So we'll keep you up
That's
to date
exciting.
on that.
And how long is he there? Is that
About a week.
week? Okay.
And Liz was also supposed to go, but
Yeah.
she had some scheduling conflicts and wasn't able to.
Okay. Nice. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Then the next item on the agenda would be administrative reports, and the first item is the superintendent's report.
Okay, one item I'd like to comment on briefly that wasn't in my written report, and actually was alluded to in the consent agenda, late resignation. We actually have had a couple. This one that was on tonight's consent agenda occurred after the last regular board meeting, and that's why you're approving it after the fact. And this is something that we're starting to see now is a trend, and Nicole, it was discussed at the accounting group of HR directors that they're seeing this in all the area districts, that there's more and more late resignations. And so it's certainly something that we're going to have to keep track of in the future and monitor it about it's just another challenge for us, filling these positions at a late stage. So I just wanted to spend just a minute about how we address it at this late time. Obviously, we're starting the school year, and we are ready to go, and we want, high-quality teachers in front of our students. So when we have a late resignation, of course, the first order of business is make sure that we have a high-quality sub in that classroom to start, the year, to make sure that we're ready to go, and then having a permanent person in there as soon as possible. And so that certainly creates a challenge. The one that was approved tonight actually was submitted on the Friday before Labor Day weekend, and school is scheduled to start, that Tuesday. And so that created a tremendous challenge. And of course, again, the first order is to find someone to be in that room on Tuesday. But, I think some of you saw the posting, and it had, some legitimate concerns about how we're doing that. So, and from there, we still then do our normal posting procedure. The one thing we will look at is some of the previous positions that we had posted over the summer. Are there any people in those applicant pools perhaps that we might want to invite in that, if it's a sixth grade position, there might have been a fifth grade position earlier that, might have similar candidates. But we still do go through the posting, and we go as quick as we can, but we want to make sure we have qualified applicants, go through the interview process, call references, and so on. And so it took us, I think we did a, very good job of getting someone in there within, 3 weeks. So, but I know that, they might very well have some questions on that, so.
What's our normal policy in reference to that? Or is there a policy?
I don't think we have anything in a written policy.
We have a contract, though.
Oh, as far as the release. Actually, because we have the clause on the individual teacher contract with liquidated damages, that is basically the out that teachers can break their contract if they're willing to pay, those damages, and then we really don't have a choice but to, accept that resignation.
So did we do that this time?
We do, yeah, we do charge
okay.
those fees.
So we didn't waive anything?
We did not,
okay.
yeah.
What is the amount?
I believe it's,
$500.
is it $500?
Yeah, it's not that much.
Okay, yeah.
Is that a standard?
Yeah.
Well, we changed that a year ago in the individual contracts. And I believe, do we have a two-tier? Was it $250 before a certain date? And then I think it went to...
Yes, it was up until August 1st, it was $250. So from July 1 until July 30, it was, $35 days?
Yeah.
$250, and then $500 August 1st through the end of the school year. So if somebody would leave mid-year, they would also be charged the $500. I would say that our liquidated damages are probably a little bit on the lower end as to what we're seeing some other districts. I know Simsbury is charging a couple $1,000s.
My observation would be that I think there's significant cost to us, not just financially, but educationally, to on that. And if it's $250 to $500, that's really a drop in the bucket.
Pocket change.
Yeah, I thought we talked about 1,000 at one point
So-
at least, and especially if this is becoming a trend as you're
Yeah.
picking up, and I'm hearing that from other districts as well. It might be worth, that's up substantially. I think it was under the old contract, it was like $250 or something, maybe $350. So we did raise it, but we might want to look at that again.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that something we can take a look at in the very near future to kind of guard ourselves against the
For next year.
agency?
Yeah, as far as
Or
timeline...
at least can we also see, I guess, what other districts, as far as what they're charging? Is there a way that we can find that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Peter?
What are the reasons that we're getting these late resignations?
I don't know if we get into too much detail as far as personal reasons. I can say that between our principals and HR director, they are, interviewing the teachers about that. I'm not sure, again, how much.
I mean, the question is it a trend they're taking positions at other school districts?
Part of it is MTI's contract, they push outside hires into August. So you start bumping around, and then you get to the end of August, and there's going to be some openings. And if any of our teachers want to move to Madison, they're going to take our teachers at the end of the contract. So as long as we're not going to pay what Madison pays, then we're going to lose some teachers at the end of. I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But by and large, most of our teachers that have left have been, and I think Nicole reported this previously, for personal things where they're more convenient, they're living, closer to another community and so on. So I guess I can state with confidence that it's not a trend that we're losing teachers in general for, reasons of competition, but it is something that we have to watch very carefully, and so I can't say that we haven't lost any because of, money or things like that, or, but, yeah, it's certainly a concern.
So, I want to talk. Yeah, so I guess one question I have, all these exit interviews, are they being put into a pot somewhere so we know that we're addressing those in the compensation? I don't know where we would address them, but somewhere we got to address them, right? One thing, I was very disappointed in this process. I think the classroom has to be sacred. I don't think the classroom was sacred here. I thought it was intolerable that it didn't get posted for 5 days. I think we might have missed out on a huge pot of candidates by not doing that. I mean, the cost isn't just $500, but it's 3 weeks of learning time. Right, and I was directly affected by that, or my son was anyway. So I don't know. I'd like to know too how, in that 2 weeks time that we had to wait, when did the resumes come in? Right? Did they come in the first week? Did they trickle until the last day? How do we do it so we don't have to wait 2 weeks if we don't have to wait 2 weeks? I mean, it was basically 3 weeks of lost learning time. I feel. And I don't know that that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know it's fair to say there was lost learning time. We had a very highly qualified substitute teacher. It was someone who was a retired teacher with many years of experience, and I think did a very fine job. And so that, certainly we would rather have regular teachers. We have substitutes all the time, and
right.
Teachers out on 12 weeks after MLA, and we, so in that respect, we've been able to get highly qualified subs. Certainly we want someone regular. As far as the process, once it's posted, and understand that, okay, the resignation came in, on Friday, so we had it posted on that Tuesday. To post something, first of all, it's a matter of putting together the description. We make sure the principal has a chance to review it first before we do that, and so I thought that was very timely to get up already by Tuesday. And then I actually did take a look myself at some of the applications. Immediately the first day, there were 3 or 4 applications. They came in regularly over those couple of weeks, and I know that the principals start reviewing immediately as they're coming through and start screening. And then when we feel that we have enough qualified applicants to begin interviewing, then we go ahead and begin that process. So
we didn't wait the 2 weeks. We waited until we had enough interviews.
I don't know the exact date that the interviews took place, but then once we have interviews, then there's reference calls, then all the HR paperwork and so on. So it was 3 weeks before when the teacher actually got into the classroom.
Right.
Which I would think would be pretty normal. I mean, because you typically would, I assume, collect applications for 2 weeks is usually the norm. And maybe if you had enough earlier, you could, but you usually post a date when it's closing, right?
Right, and then sometimes if because it's a time limit, we'll post it, open until filled.
Right.
So that, depending on the timing of it. I would say 2 weeks is the minimum. Normally it's 3 or 4 weeks that we're collecting applications. It depends on the position. If it's one that we don't have a lot of applicants because it's a hard to fill position, typically it will be open longer. Right. And a position that we know we're going to get lots of applicants, it might be a little bit shorter, window.
I just felt circumstances before the last weekend before it started, and then we had the resignation. I thought it should have been a fire, and, that should have been put out that day.
Well,
that's my opinion, and that's
how would you do that? I don't think you can rush that process.
But no, I don't think you hire that day. But I think if that's posted, that gives every teacher in the state one last weekend to look at it.
I guess I mean, I understand that you feel that way because we've had this discussion. Right. Personally, I don't think not posting it during Labor Day weekend was a big issue. I doubt very seriously that we lost anyone over that weekend.
Experience in the end.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think
I think it's appropriate for Jeff to have his thoughts about that.
Right.
I know.
Oh, it is. I'm just saying I wouldn't argue for changing.
I was arguing.
Right.
I'm just saying this is what we're talking about.
You're right. But I think we have to respect the process, and that was why I asked Dan to explain the process. I appreciate that. In my own opinion, I would not encourage us to ever short-circuit the process. That's all I'm saying. And I don't think whether you post it on a Friday versus a Tuesday on a holiday weekend, to me, I don't think you lose applicants. And I understand that you think you do. That's fine. And that's where I said before we'd have to agree to disagree on that. But I think regardless, even if we had posted it the Friday, I would have argued for waiting the full 2 weeks to get the applicants until we had enough applicants. So in the end, that's all I'm saying. I think we did it in a responsible way. And I do think we have to be careful about when we hire substitute teachers. I don't think it's a lost day of learning. I mean, as a teacher myself, I put a lot of effort into sub plans when I had a sub, because I didn't want it to be a lost day.
There wasn't a sub-plan to.
Well, but when they start, they work with their team, and they come up with 3 weeks. They don't just twiddle their thumbs for 3 weeks. I mean, they were doing lesson plans, and which is expected. So anyway, that is getting us.
I guess the final comment I make, I absolutely appreciate that there needs to be a sense of urgency, without question. That's what we do. That's the most important thing, and I can assure you that our principal and our HR department as well recognize that urgency, and to get it done in 3 weeks is very quick. And but the process was thorough, and we feel very good about the hire that we made in that situation. There is one other point you should be aware of, and it didn't impact the timeline, because I think it really would have taken at least 2 weeks to get through this anyway, but we also have a provision in our handbook that requires us to post internally for 2 weeks to see if there's any internal transfers that want to take place. So we do need to wait the minimum of 2 weeks before we hire to give people internally an opportunity to apply.
Which I also think we need to work on that. At a certain date, I mean, I love that, I think that's a great thing, until it reaches a certain date, then I think it's got to.
I agree. I think we need to look at revising that language. That can be a hindrance. Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for giving our teachers first chance at everything.
I mean, I think that's a good idea in theory until it's an emergency like this. I mean, do we want to sit and wait for 2 weeks to play, I don't know, just to kind of play the shuffle game to see if anybody wants to move, and then you still got to wait. It can delay things many weeks the way I look at it, because if you have somebody, take that position, which is a different position at another school, now you got to wait another 2 weeks to post that position.
Yeah.
So when does it end? So
Yeah.
it ends up can take a lot longer than we need to in a situation where we're trying to cover a classroom get a new teacher as soon as possible. So in theory, it sounds good, but realistically, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense.
I'd be to a date, right? Like June 15th.
And I think that is something that'll be looked at this year. Dee?
Do we have a policy or practice of systematic exit interviews? I just don't mean kind of as you're going out, closing the door, saying, gee, why'd you leave? But some kind of systematic interview process about many aspects of their experience. Personnel systems, you learn a lot about your organization and what you can do to change it or to improve it. It's not just learning that that their grandmother is ill and they have to quit or something like that. But and if so, it would seem to me that whether they be substitutes or people retiring, I think that the reason why they leave would probably be only one of maybe 10 questions on that. But it would seem to me that periodically it would be interesting to, without naming names necessarily, to get a report on things in which we could improve life or improve instruction or improve whatever it might be.
Yeah, without question, you all know the value of exit interviews. And so to answer your question, this year we did not have a formal process. Informally, Nicole made sure she took an opportunity to contact everyone. Next year there will be a very formal process as you described. That here's the set of things we want to ask and so on.
That's a good idea, Susan.
I appreciate that we have staff now that can actually at least start moving on this. Again, you look at personal experiences you had, and our son, when he started kindergarten, had a teacher who was very ill, and they had a different sub every other day in kindergarten. So, you lose the continuity of the lesson plan. So I really agree, particularly with what Lionel said, and that is, if you can remove barriers, so that as you look at this process, it can be efficient and best for the students, that's great. So I think it's helpful to have you give that to us and get open up some discussion and hear who has concerns and who may not, and kind of how they feel about that. But again, getting that sub in there and getting one that's going to stay for more than a day is really helpful.
Which was done.
And then getting a new staff in there. Then the other point I just want to mention to make sure that we're staying on track on this is that if we're adding a new staff, I want to make sure that we have adequate time allotted for the teacher mentors. Because I know they're pretty full right now. So I just wanted to mention that.
You'll
Especially
probably
when
be
it's a
seeing
new
soon
rule.
another increase in FTE to
Oh,
cover
yeah, there's
that,
one
yeah.
here
Well,
tonight, that
there
we just
is.
approved one, so.
And
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
asked Dan about that
Right.
earlier, because as you see those numbers, first it was 40 new teachers, and it was 50.
Right.
And they do focus on new to the district, brand new
Yeah.
teachers. That's their
Right.
top priority.
Right.
And so when you're in that, if we're hiring people in that category, it's nice to know we have mentoring staff that are gonna support that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay. All right, second part of my report is in writing and is just a point of information. If you recall with our policies, many of them require administrative guidelines to go along with them about how we implement. And there are two of them that I just made minor changes to, but by policy, you are to be informed as a board anytime we make those changes. And so therefore, both of them regarding complaint procedures. One for policy 411 on equal education opportunities, just clarifying that those complaints should be made to the Director of Student Services. And then we clarified a little bit with the maintenance of the records. And then very similarly for policy 512 on employee harassment, that now that we have an HR director, that's who those complaints should go to. So changing that in the administrative guidelines as well as clarifying the procedures. So very minor revision. This just as a point of information, the we use the template we used to write these were from the policy resource guide. That those were recently updated and they were very helpful. They were not major change from what we already had in place. So you have them attached, with you. So these will be after tonight. Will be forwarded to staff as well before the end of the week as a point of information.
Those make sense. Comments or questions about those?
Dan, do the comments basically summarize are there any other changes? It basically looks like under 411 that we basically just changed Director of Pupil Services and additional guidelines for maintenance of the records.
Yeah, those are really the only thing that was substantive. Yeah.
So it's really procedural.
Correct.
Okay. If there are no further questions on that, we'll move on to the next report, which is Director of Student Services, Scott Brown, report on seclusion and restraint.
Hey, good evening, everybody. So you received kind of a succinct written report, and I know that Joyce also posted a copy of our policy, which addresses the use of seclusion and restraint in schools. But this is in response to Act 125, which went into effect on September 1st of 2012. And that basically prohibited the use of seclusion and restraint in public schools except in very specific circumstances. And those circumstances relate to when a student's behavior presents a very clear and imminent safety risk either to themselves or other people. The Act defines physical restraint essentially as preventing a student from moving freely by physically restraining them, and seclusion as essentially separating the student from the general student population and preventing the student from leaving. So it is important to point out that these are considered crisis interventions, not disciplinary measures. So these would only be used, as I said, in accordance with Act 125, which is around imminent risks to to either the student's safety or the safety of others. So for example, this would not be used if a student was simply being verbally aggressive or engages in behaviors like verbal outbursts or throwing papers off their desk or something like that. That would be managed in other ways. This is really used in an instance, for example, if a student was going to bolt into traffic, if students are involved in a physical altercation, if a student was physically aggressive toward a staff member. Those are examples of times when we would possibly use seclusion or restraint. Whenever an instance of seclusion or restraint occurs, it is ultimately up to the building principal to make sure that one, the parents of the student are notified as immediately as possible after the incident occurs, and that the staff who are involved in the incident fill out our incident report form and document in pretty substantial detail what happened, what was done prior to, after, the duration of the incident, and those sorts of things. The buildings maintain those reports in a file. We do ask that they also send a copy to my office so that we can monitor, particularly if we see a student who has repeated crises. It is important, not just as a documentation requirement under Act 125, but our building problem-solving teams, our teacher helping teacher teams, and IEP teams also use that documentation as a data set when they're planning supports for students. So if they see a student, for example, that's had a number of crises, the team pulls together to brainstorm around what kinds of behavioral or social emotional supports can be put into place to better support the student and hopefully reduce the number of crisis moments the student experiences. All of our staff who are involved or who may be called upon to intervene using any kind of restraint or seclusion technique have been trained in nonviolent crisis intervention. We offer multiple trainings through the year. My office maintains a database of all of our staff working in special education, administration, our school psychs, so that we know who has been trained and who is due for a refresher training. This summer, we offered the initial training for all of our new staff who fit in those roles and who may be responders in a significant behavior incident like this. And we are also requiring that after they've gone through the initial training, all of our staff are retrained on a refresher basis. It's a one-day training. They go through a refresher training every calendar year. So that everyone has an annual refresher. We do track that data. We will flag them in our database if they're out of compliance with that requirement. That's not a legal requirement. That's just sort of a best practice thing that we're doing to make sure that everyone's up to date. If someone is out of date with that, we will send a letter to their building principal, letting the principal know, and that that person may not assist in any kind of restraint or seclusion until their training has been updated. And so the report that you have is pretty succinct. I won't read the whole thing to you, of course. One of the things that you've probably noticed is that there is some variance in numbers in our buildings. My experience, particularly at the secondary level, it would be much rarer to engage with a student on a physical basis. And I would encourage staff not to do that, even in the instance of a physical fight between, for example, two high school students, to use other techniques to try and stop that. I think the developmental level of teenagers, I think they handle crises in slightly different ways and maybe not even in school. I would say that this data is very, very student dependent, and I can say that because I know many of the students who have been involved in these incidents, and some crisis by its very nature is not predictable. Some are experiencing family transitions, parents coming and going, in a variety of things. And so I can tell you that staff are documenting and only using these techniques when absolutely essential for the safety of the student and other people around them. And they're also, as I said, using this as part of their problem solving meetings around students to put additional supports in place as are necessary. So that is it. Question?
Your statement that the data here, there's some variance, is really an understatement, don't you think? When you have 47 incidents in one school and two other schools have 0 or 1, is that perfection in some of those schools and chaos in the other? You can kind of help me out with this.
Yeah.
Age level, yeah.
Yeah, I would not, and I guess I would go back to, this is really about individual students and individual students who are experiencing a crisis moment. It can vary considerably even throughout the year. That there can be a period of time when one student may on a daily basis be going through anger issues or something like that, and then go through a period of time in the year where there really isn't any incident. I would hesitate to say that we can judge a school's behavior plan or behavior management based on just this number. I really think that it's tied to individual students who they just happen to have enrolled. For example, if it's a first grader at Winnequa who's having a particularly rough year and is responsible for multiple incidents, that first grader could just as easily have been at Taylor Prairie School and upped their data as well.
So Scott, what happens then? I mean, that same kid eventually is going to be sitting in Glacial Drumlin. So why are there no numbers there for these same kids?
Again, it's so tied to individual students.
And development, as you
You know,
said.
as a student gets older, they may not have the outbursts. They may have instances where the family is working with outside mental health providers, and they could be coordinating outside treatment, which also could impact school behavior. Quite frankly, some of the students are highly transient, and they move away before they go to our middle school.
You know what would be helpful in this report is a slash with the number of students. So when you look at 47 and then you can see it's 4 students, that gives you a whole
Well,
different perspective.
That is here. Number of students
Mhm.
involved is 8 for Winnequa,
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so it is on.
And that,
yeah.
that reflects the 47 incidents.
It was 8
Okay,
students
good.
who were
That's
responsible
good.
for 47, yep.
if you figure Cottage Grove, we break it up. So it's Cottage Grove and Taylor Prairie. So if you put Cottage Grove and Taylor Prairie together, it looks to me like it's pretty equal K through 5.
To what we're seeing, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point,
Yeah.
actually. Peter?
You didn't find any incidents that were compliant with Act 125?
No, I did not. Yeah. And I'm very confident the staff who respond to these do an excellent job documenting, as I said, in great detail what the incident was. And this is really an intervention of last resort for them. It isn't something that they're engaging in to enact discipline. It's really about trying to manage a student who's experiencing a crisis.
From the 90 reports you've seen, taking that information, do you see anything in there that indicates how we might reduce these numbers? Give us any indications of what we might do before we need to get to this point.
Yeah. One of the things I'm looking into is how to develop more wraparound supports that are related to mental health issues and social emotional issues that would work on sort of coaching students within the context of the school day more intensively, and also working with families outside of school so that there's consistency, between home and school expectations and things like that. It will require a little bit. It'll require some professional development on the part of our student services staff on how to provide that in school. I think that's a new area for schools, quite frankly, is addressing students' mental health issues. But I think for our kids, like when you see 8 kids who are responsible for 47 incidents, that's something that clearly there's an unmet need there, and we need to develop some additional supports around that. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
If one kid responsible for many incidents.
Right.
Is there something like an RTI approach where we look at early intervention once we get 2 incidents or something that we can reduce this? I think we'll end up with less disruption and less paperwork.
Right.
Everything in the end, if there's something.
Sort of what are our decision rules that trigger different levels of intervention? Absolutely.
And do we have anything in place now?
Yes. We have a lot of it is. I would say individual programming, check-in, check-outs. So we use through our PBIS program, students are assigned sort of an adult mentor who they check in the morning with, they check out at the end of the day with. There are different levels of incentive-based programs that we're using. So a student may carry a behavior chart with them. They may set, individual behavior goals that they try to reach throughout the day or by the week, depending on the age of the student. So there's individual planning that we do on a part of students, but I think where I think we need to get to is sort of what is the systems approach. And that's what I heard in your initial question, is sort of what are those triggers or what are those decision points where a student hits this number that this triggers, that this goes into effect. We also do a number of social skills groups and things like of that nature in the buildings that are also led by student services staff.
If we have a lot of sort of repeat offenders, either our interventions that you're describing aren't effective, or we're not getting there early enough.
Yeah.
Do we see, and the question would be, do we see a reduction in incidents with the kids once they start with the interventions?
I would really have to go back and analyze. It's almost like, to me, it's like doing kind of a case study, because they're all sort of unique in a way, because what triggers the behavior may be very different between students. So how we would respond to that would be a very individualized approach. So I would need to look at that data more closely to make, before I could say, yes, what we're doing does generally reduce the incidence. We've actually, this is, I think, year 2 of reporting this. Yeah. And when I looked back at last year's data, these numbers aren't that different from what we saw. And I would argue that probably historically they're not. Before this data was really reported and analyzed, I would say it was probably about the same as well, if I had to guess.
What are your goals?
My goals really are around the coordination of mental health services and working more closely with outside providers. For example, our high school staff are undergoing a training it's through the Department of Health Services, but it's the acronym is ESPRIT. And it's really meant to be a very quick and targeted intervention to target a specific behavior. And if it isn't something that we can handle in school, to work with the family on referral for some kind of outside treatment, or work with the family on what the resources are available in the community. At the other levels, that's again, it's something that it's related to sort of the coordination of services around the student is my goal. So what is it that we can offer in school through our student services staff, whether it's individual counseling, whether it's specific behavior curricula that they can implement with individual students, and then what are the options for continuing that outside of school and also connecting it with what's going on at home or in the community as well. I think that mentoring is also part of that for kids. Another goal, I guess, would be is what community partners can we reach out to sort of pool resources, like, for example, the United Way, around providing some adult mentors for kids who are struggling in school, who can be sort of an objective outside person that student can build a relationship with, and have simply just kind of an open, caring relationship that they're not giving them a grade, they're not responsible for enacting discipline or calling the family, that kind of thing. So those would be probably the most immediate things that we're looking at doing. Longer term, I'm hoping to partner with other districts around pooling resources to share staff people. This is very much in the preliminary stages, but there's a lot of possibility, there's a lot of attention focused on sort of mental health, social emotional services, and how can we pool resources to get some people coming in to work with, because you sort of have this continuum of kids. And certainly, like, the handful, the small number we have up here are like way up at the top, through the tier 3 or the end of the continuum. Mm-hmm. And that's where we really need to bring in some outside resources to assist with that too, because our building staff are also trying to work with everybody else along the continuum as well. So how can we work creatively? While we can't all add all of these positions in every building, how can we work creatively as sort of a consortium to say, we all have these common needs, we have this handful of kids, now what can we do to really do something different than what we've already been trying and sort of managing them during the day? Yeah.
Well, when I looked at this, it kind of blew the statistical tables off the chart here just a little bit. On the other hand, another analysis, if you look at this, it seems to me, it tells me that the problems, if I wanted to put a good face on this, the problems are identified well in the elementary school, and they seem to be picked up, either the kids are not in school beyond that, or that the programs are followed up well in the middle school and the high school. On the other hand, there's something telling me about middle school kids and raging hormones that that you follow me? But why these numbers don't, and I'm just wondering, is there an under-reporting at middle school or high school? Or is there a solution to the problem before they get there?
I have no reason to suspect under-reporting. I guess that would be a better question to ask the middle school and high school directly, but I have no reason to suspect that. I do think there is something in my own experience, and this is just kind of me speaking anecdotally, not from a research standpoint, but my own experience just working in schools, and I've worked at both levels. The kids developmentally, the younger kids, tend to act out just in terms of the way they communicate with the world and when they're angry. My experience is they tend to act out physically a little bit more, or they run, or they put themselves in riskier or less safe situations. My experience with dealing with teenagers who are engaging in physical altercations is that even within that, when there's an adult they have a relationship with, it's more likely you can sort of talk them down and get them to disengage, even if it's after a few seconds, than it is, for example, with a little guy who's highly agitated.
So they've learned socialized skills and conflict resolution skills,
right?
Either through training that we've offered or through growing up.
Yes, and their ability to process, I guess, I would say is different the older that they get.
Jeff?
I would hope that part of the answer here would be our commitment to restorative justice. Because I would think that, that's kind of where we go, right? Right here is where a lot of it is meant to
Definitely.
make it a definite fact.
And that is something, along with the use of circles, is something that we're definitely continuing to move forward with. I would hesitate to say, though, that we're at a level of implementation where we can draw conclusions about whether it's had a measurable impact on our data. I think what we've done with it has been excellent, and it's definitely something that I said that we'll continue, but we haven't reached a level of implementation with it where we can say, yes, that is the reason that we're seeing.
Because I think restorative justice in itself, for the schools that do it, can.
Absolutely.
So that's why I'm getting that.
Yeah.
And also, if you're a high school kid, because it's easier to restrain a third grader than a high school kid.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Isn't that
Oh,
something that we would, like, if there's a problem, we would call the police probably?
Definitely.
And that wouldn't show up in this report, right?
Yes, and that's, and we have obviously a school resource officer who I'm sure administration would call if there were. And I would also encourage the use of other techniques. So for example, if you have a fight, slamming a hardcover book on the floor to make a sound to distract the kids and then sort of gently separating them versus like trying to grab on them and separate them that way. I would hope that staff would respond in those ways, because obviously there's a much greater risk for both parties when you're restraining an adult-sized or trying to seclude an adult-sized student versus a kindergartner. So yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like kids that fall into this category would be examples of the Tier 3, when you look at the RTI scale, which speaks to all your efforts of combining a lot of resources. And I know, Ann isn't here tonight, but she gave an example last year, and it wasn't, I don't think, a student who necessarily had been restrained, but she had an example where they had built in all those kinds of steps. And in his second year at Winnequa, the student was up to grade level on all of his tests and had, I think, no referrals for at least that last semester, that second year. So there are some success stories here, and it would be interesting to track some of these kids to see, are the same, we have 8 last year, okay, how many of those 8 are repeating this year? It would be, this also, it seems to me, might be an appropriate SLO goal for teachers who have these students, special ed teachers maybe who have these students, because you can focus in on 1 or 2 kids and just kind of zero in. So there are lots of ways to, I think, get at this.
I would agree to, if you could take, if you had to have a little internal study, would be to take these 12 kids that are now in Cottage Grove, Winnequa, and Trailer Prairie, and track them and see what experiences they have and that sort of thing, because something happens if they don't show up on the data. I presume they continue on in the system.
Yeah, happy to.
Okay, Susan.
Well, and I think the question I really had, maybe I can say it better this time, is, and it's helpful to see number of students involved, but I don't necessarily see, so maybe 2 of those students had 1 occurrence, and maybe 1 of those students had 14.
You are correct.
So
Yeah.
that's a piece I don't see.
Okay.
So that, when you see that number, again, if you do population health, and you look at the risk, and you take the high risk, and you intervene with the high risk first, and you intervene preventatively versus actively, which is the seclusion and restraint. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're trying to do. The other question that I kind of had to what, again, looking at the data, was we probably, for sure in the last 10 years, but I'm pretty sure in the last 5, have doubled our number of psychologists in our school district. And are we utilizing those services in a strong, consistent manner? I mean, that's our expertise. If you took that kid out of school and you brought in mental health support pieces, those are the kind of people you'd be bringing in. Plus, these guys have school experience. So are they building a case management plan with those students?
Definitely. Our psychs are definitely involved with these kiddos, as I would expect, quite frankly, our counselors to be in the buildings, and social workers.
Right.
That's part of that wraparound approach, that, you know, maybe the psych is doing some specific counseling techniques, but I would want the social worker involved with the family and be communicating about, you know, what are their needs? Do you have, are there resources I can connect you within the community, and things like that? So again, we're going for that wraparound kind of approach.
Well, and just the last comment I have is, obviously, you guys don't have teenage boys. Because, again, I'm still a little stymied by the numbers, but I think if we could add that second layer of kind of showing the interventions and that it's a data success point, rather than just not documenting it, the event, that would be a great piece to be able to go forward with, and a great success for our district.
Yeah, it would be a very rich data set. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, the other piece of data here is that Winnequa, numbers of students with disabilities, 4, accounting for 30 incidents. Those 4 cases would be, you know who they are, and that sort of thing. You could probably explain them in some case, but that's something that needs some explanation, I would think.
Yes. Well, and all of those students would have a specific behavior plan. So when these are happening, IEP teams are reconvening to discuss what's happened and what may not be in place, and what more can be done at the school level to manage behavior.
Because I think the data reveals target areas of further inquiry or intervention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, the next item on the agenda then will be Director of Instruction report, Andrew Riddell, on the report cards, student assessment systems, and educator effectiveness.
All right, short list this evening.
Short list.
Good evening.
Thank you.
You have my written report and supporting materials, and I'll just make a few comments on each of these topics, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Starting with DPI district and school report cards. As you know, this is the this is the second year for district report cards and the third year for school report cards. In both cases, the report card accountability ratings are based on a number of factors, but predominantly WKCE testing. Other factors that are included there are graduation rates, school reading performance, and attendance. And then each of those priority areas generates a unit score, and then that is accumulated into an overall accountability rating, a points total that is translated into a rating. For 2013-14, Cottage Grove, Glacial Drumlin, Monona Grove High School, and Winnequa School all earned exceeds expectations accountability ratings on report cards. Taylor Prairie and Monona Grove Liberal Arts Charter School, MG21, are evaluated slightly differently, assessed slightly differently because of either their enrollment, the size of their student enrollment, or their grade configuration. And they fall under the alternative accountability process. And in both cases, these schools received ratings of satisfactory progress. You'll recall from previous years, Taylor Prairie in the past has received an accountability rating that looked like the other schools. The reason for that was, if you recall, there was a year where we had second grade students attending Taylor Prairie for just 1 year, and those students then went into Cottage Grove, and that created a connection, a test system. There's been enough time passed now where those students have moved along through where Taylor Prairie no longer has any connection in terms of the grade levels there for the testing, which is why they're now under the alternative accountability system. So I'd like to offer my congratulations to our students and teachers and administrators at those schools for their work as reflected in the report cards. The district report card, excuse me, Monona Grove earned a rating of meets expectations for 2013-14. I'd like to point out that this one contributing factor in this rating is a 5-point deduction for under participation in state testing by students with disabilities. And as you know, there's a requirement in the accountability system for 95% test participation overall, excuse me, and in each of the subgroups. One of the interesting things about state law and accountability policy is state law under Wisconsin statutes, parents have the right to opt their students out of state testing, as you know, which is we fully support. However, when they do that, and we obviously grant those requests when they to be compliant with state law, when those students are opted out of the state testing system, they're then counted as non-participants in the accountability system. And so we're sort of caught in the middle of that. And that happened in this case. This year, so we were under the 95% participation rate for students with disabilities, and that is what the points deduction was for the district report card. And this parent opt-out contributed to that. And I want to make it very clear, we fully support parents' opt-outs, but I just wanted to make you aware of how that factors into the accountability rating for the school. So that's the district and school report cards for the year. Are there any questions I can answer for you? Yes.
That's a really minimal amount of people in our district too, right?
Very small group, yes.
Like,
Yes.
what was it, like 7 or something like that?
No, more than, you mean the number of students
The number of students that opted out that caused us to lose these points.
I believe it was 5, if I remember
Right.
correctly, yes.
So it's
that's
just
right.
kind of a, not only caught in the middle, it's kind of a ridiculous.
It's,
We're doing something
Yeah.
that's legal. 5 parents out of, how many kids? 2,000 kids.
I just, as you know, I did work with Superintendent Olson to file a response to DPI on that, and they were not able to grant us any leeway on that at all, and their response was it was due to federal policy. So, but yes, it's a very small number of students, and the way the accountability policy is written, that's what happened.
All of those were parent dropouts.
Not all. There were in the group of 5, there were 3 that were parent opt-outs, and then 2 that did not test for some specific reasons that I can't get into here. But of the 3, and the parent opt-outs, those 3 is what made the difference, right? Right. And again, not to cast blame on parents, please.
Right.
but
No,
it's-
I don't.
yeah.
But it goes
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
limitations of, when you look at the report cards, you have to be aware of the limitations of their
Right.
value, and it speaks to
And,
that, I
and,
think.
I'm sorry, and in the end, there's not, you really don't get penalized for anything but a test score that people forget to leave.
Yeah.
Peter?
How are you going to meet the goal of 95% participation next year?
Well, we do everything we can to ensure that every student who is eligible for is required to participate participates. We start by, it's very simple, of running the list of students who are required to participate, making sure that every kid takes the test. If there's a makeup that needs to happen, we make sure the test is made up. But at the same time, if a parent chooses to opt their student out of the testing, we can't compel state testing in those cases. So yeah.
That's the state goal, that's not our goal. Right, 95% participation.
That's
Our
a state
goal is-
requirement, right?
Our goal is, I would hope our goal would be parents do what the parents feel is best for the kids to be supported.
Right.
Susan?
Well, you have to, and I'm interested, Dean hasn't commented on this yet, you have to really wonder about a DPI assessment of a district where all the individual schools have exceeded expectations, and then 2 are in, and then the district gets this accounting. So you really wonder, it does make you question the validity of the findings in terms of the district report card. and I think it's worth commenting on that as a board and as a district in relation to Mr. Evers and yeah. So I would encourage that we do that and that the board be willing to sign that as a board. Because how does that reflect who you are and what you do when your individual report cards are this? So you have 5 kids who got A's on a test and your average is a C-. I don't get that.
DPI is aware of that, it goes to his, I mean, that is a requirement.
But I
of
think
the
we should be
federal
yeah.
waiver. Right, well,
Right.
right, yeah, and I'm sure we're not opponent, I mean.
Right,
Yeah.
but remember the.
So you're,
based on-
you're proposing some kind of letter from the board?
Yes, and what we found in the past is that when districts have been concerned, right, Andrew, about particular things, they've actually gone back and evaluated components in the report card, because this happened to us like 2 years ago, right? And then they reevaluated.
There's always an opportunity for districts get a preliminary report card and the opportunity to make sure that the data that are reflected there are accurate. And we did that. We verified that, yes, this is in fact the data that are here in terms of test participation. And when we in that investigation is when we confirmed who didn't test for. There were a couple students who had very unusual circumstances and couldn't participate, and then we had our parent opt-out cases. And we submitted that information to DPI as part of that, essentially an appeal process, and asked for a revision of our rating, and they declined that. And the reason that they declined it was because of their they are held to federal policy that goes back to the accountability waiver from No Child Left Behind, and really it goes back to NCLB. The 95% participation rule goes way back. So their response to us was they have no leeway. If we were going to perhaps communicate our frustration to the DPI, it would be, well, the accountability law and the participation requirement put schools in a very difficult position in the middle. So if you honor state statute, which of course we do,
Right.
you're held to account on testing participation, which by default penalizes your report card
They
rating.
effectively created a conflict of laws in
Right.
that they require that you allow the parent to opt out, and then that dramatically affects how you score.
Right.
And when you look at numbers like 81.4 on the student achievement and 89.9 on on-track and post-secondary readiness, understanding closing gaps is something that's still a work in progress. And those sit in the exceeds expectations and almost is that significantly exceeds, then it makes you not have confidence in the report that represents your school district. And I think it's important that DPI understands that, and in fact, that they've created a conflict of law for us by mandating that we allow the opt-out and yet penalizing us when we do.
And I think that just from conversations with Dr. Evers, they absolutely do understand it. But they are caught in a rock, between a rock and a hard place.
Is that federal or state, though? This is partly in compliance with federal, isn't it?
Right.
Right.
It is. Yeah.
If the state had its own choice, it could be this or something else.
It could be, but they're held to account to federal
But
policy.
the way I would read this Monona Grove report card, when it says total deductions 5, right? That's a subtraction of 5 of that overall score.
Right.
So the score for the district would be 77, at least, and not 72, and they would be exceeding expectations rather than meeting expectations. I think the important thing is that if the time that you report this to the public, you don't have to make a big deal out of it, but it would seem to me explanations can be made on that and still honoring parent requests that they go out. Had 3 parents not done this, all the schools would have been exceeding. And I think for us the issue is what this means to our own larger community.
Sure,
here,
sure.
And not the battle with DPI.
Just to
They
communicate
can't do
that
about it
clearly.
anyway.
And,
I think that makes sense. Jeff?
Yeah, I want to reiterate what they said. I agree 100% because it's not what Tony Evers says. It's what, we're spending all this effort in a communication with our district.
Right.
Our district looks at 72% and says, well, we meet expectations, but we really are higher than that because 3 parents who we support, out of 2,100 kids, knocked us way down, and I think a letter would be appropriate.
Well, I think just a line item under whenever these get communicated to parents, I don't know what our process is for doing that, or, I mean, it's already been in the paper. But
Right, we are putting together the annual report, we have a reference to it in there, so. I'll just make one quick comment, and you're right, this absolutely is a federal issue, and the key to fixing this is reauthorization of ESEA, which is 7 years overdue already by the federal government, and so if they get their act together and finally reauthorize it and get rid of the waivers, then that would take care of this as well. Then it would be a DPI decision.
Great.
So, hopefully that'll happen one of these days.
Okay. Oh, yes.
What's the report show us about our reduction in our gaps?
On the whole, it's very interesting that you asked that, because that's also been, they changed the calculation for how those are done now. We are having more success closing gaps for students who are economically disadvantaged. We're actually, that trajectory is actually moving in the right direction. We continue to struggle to close gaps, particularly in reading, for students of color and students with disabilities.
Okay.
So what does the numbers tell us on that, I guess? I know in most of the cases, higher number is good. What is this telling us? Is it the same, the higher number is good, or lower number?
Do you mean on this box
Yeah,
here?
yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, you want this is a points total based on criteria within each of these categories. So what we're trying to do here, if we are successful in helping, for example, students of color improve, what happens is the way they calculate gaps here is a little different than the way we do it in our districts. I'll try and explain that briefly. For students who are members of groups where there's a performance gap here, their performance is compared to the counterpart group. For example, students of color, performance in reading, their performance is, in whether they improve, is compared to white students' performance in reading, not to other members of students of color group. So if we are successful in helping our students of color improve their scores in reading at a faster rate than students who are white students, their improvement in reading, then we're closing that gap. That's the measurement. And then if that's the case, then this points total will increase. So the short answer to your question is yes, we're looking for a higher number here, but underneath of that number, that's how that calculation is made. And in the case of students who are economically disadvantaged, that's in fact what's happening.
So basically, we are beating state scores. If I read this correctly, we're beating state scores and everything except for pretty much closing the gap.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And even within closing gaps, it's specifically reading achievement and then graduation. And in every other category, we're exceeding state scores.
What did you learn from these test scores that you would change?
What I learned from the test scores that would change?
Curriculum and instruction is doing.
Well, this is data that confirms our other data points that we look at all the time. Continues to remind us to pay very close attention to students who are struggling readers, many of whom happen to be students of color or English language learners or students with disabilities, and that we need to be extremely attentive to their needs. I think the staffing changes that we've done for this year will help us do that. Just in the first few weeks of school, working with Ms. Lyons has been just a fantastic opportunity to provide more support for schools in reading and for students in reading. There's really nothing here that's new. It's for us, the challenge is to continue to work harder to meet individual students' needs in the areas where they need help.
Does this data tell you that Andrew Burdell, Deb Lyons, and TOSAs are supposed to work on closing the gap?
Just like it did in the spring, yeah.
Well, we did have reading teachers who were specifically to
Yeah.
target this,
Yeah.
because we were aware of this was happening last year as well.
Well,
So.
Well,
So we are
not just
hoping-
joshing, I'm
No.
Yeah,
saying-
no, I mean, that's
We are
absolutely
hoping
what we
that-
do,
yeah,
because the
I mean,
reading,
that was the point of the staffing plan.
that's exactly right. I mean, we've increased support for reading for students who are struggling readers, and specifically for this reason.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we'll talk to the three of you at the next year at this time.
I look forward to it. All right, so we tackle educator effectiveness for a few moments. As you know, this is the first year of full implementation of the educator effectiveness system. That's the new state evaluation system. Also part of the state waiver from No Child Left Behind. Monona Grove, as you also know, has participated in pilot work for the past 2 years. As part of the DPI model, we've also had the Danielson framework for teaching in place since 2002. So we feel like we're pretty well positioned to begin full implementation this year. Just as a reminder, in the educator effectiveness systems for both teachers and for principals, the rating is based on a combination of things, 50% professional practice and 50% student learning. For teachers, the professional practice is the Danielson framework for teaching, and we use some of the specialist rubrics for roles that are a little bit unique, such as school psychologist, school counselor, library media specialist. The Danielson Charlotte Danielson herself adapted her own framework for those specific roles. We've had those in place in the district in the past. We're continuing to use them for those roles here. The other part of measures for teachers is evidence of student learning, primarily student learning objectives, which you've heard about in the past. We've presented here in the past. And then also there is a piece of that is reflective of state performance in reading. There'll be a value-added calculation in, I believe, 3 years once there's enough data to base those. But predominantly it's student learning objectives. For principals, it's very similar. Principal professional practice is assessed with Wisconsin Framework for Principal Leadership, and then principals also write school learning objectives, which are very similar to teachers' SLOs, but at the school level rather than at a classroom level. As we've said from the beginning, we strongly encourage teachers to develop their SLOs collaboratively with their colleagues and to use their collaborative time to work on those projects together. We also provide support and coaching for both principals and teachers in their educator effectiveness work through our TOSAs, our instructional facilitator at the high school, myself, and we do everything we can to support people. Training and support over the last year, DPI released a series of online modules. One was a very brief little introductory video that was called Step 1. Step 2 was about a 60-minute online module, which everyone completed last spring. We had all of our new folks in the district complete that in August as part of their new hire training sessions, that Step 2 online piece. And we also provided them with an overview of the Danielson Framework for Teaching during their orientation. And then in the first few weeks of school here, so they're all caught up. All of our new folks are right on track with where everyone else is at the start of school. And now everybody is beginning the next set of DPI online modules, which are called Step 4. There's one at the beginning of the year, which people are in the middle of completing now. There'll be another one mid-year and a third one at the end of the year. And those correspond with the major periods of activity in the evaluation process. During the summer, you might ask, what's Step 3, since I didn't write about that. Step 3 is a training for evaluators, and all of the administrators in our district, as well as our effectiveness coaches, attended that training in August. There's more information about educator effectiveness online at the DPI website. But so far, we're off and running, and we're getting good questions about SLO design and professional practice goal design, and away we go.
Do you have a feeling that the teachers have a good feel for the change in this process, that it's been open and transparent with them and they understand how the evaluations are going to be done?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I do. And the reason I say that is one, because of the familiarity with the Danielson framework. That's been in the district for so long. People know that. And we started working on SLOs, and I started going around to every single school. Over the past 2 years, I've been in every school multiple times to work on SLOs, to first introduce what that's all about. And then last year, we had every teacher in the district work with their colleagues to actually do a practice SLO, just to learn the process. And if it didn't go exactly the way you hoped, that's fine, because that's the year to learn it. And so my sense is that people are as comfortable as they can be with something of this nature that's new, and they feel like they have the support, and they've got, if they have a question, they know who to go ask that question of, and that includes me. And people feel pretty comfortable with it, from what I understand. I'm not, my phone's not ringing off the hook with what do I do types of questions, or I'm angry, or I'm scared, or I'm not hearing that at all.
Well, I think one of the things that was a finding, and I don't know how valid it is, but I think it was a finding, was that even though we were using the Danielson framework, we didn't have a strong, committed process to that framework. So that may be a change that we're seeing. And Then do we have a schedule for implementation? Are we gonna be using, what's the requirement for using the teacher effectiveness system? When do we actually?
We use it now. So teachers, the evaluation, in terms of implementation, do you mean who's being evaluated on a given year?
What do you mean, other than this checklist that Andrew?
Right, so just wondering, so it's being implemented this year, and,
Mhm.
and there's an awareness not only with the teachers, but in the community that the system, that's why I'm asking
Oh.
the question, so the community can be aware that
Sure.
we're using a new evaluative system with
Mhm.
teachers, but it's based on a previous framework, so there's a small,
And that information is also in the annual report as
and
well.
they will be doing it this year.
Mhm. Yep.
I just wanted, since we have the opportunity to use this to tell the message.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Sure.
Weren't some of our fourth grade teachers at Cottage Grove piloting?
They were, yes, they were, and going back 2 years, actually.
Yeah, we had 2 years of
Yep,
pilots.
and then interestingly, that pilot team, there was some of the members of that team actually moved to other schools and at the end of that year, and then became very instrumental in helping those schools with their next round of piloting the following year.
Peter, and then you.
That's what I'd like to see.
Thank you.
You piloted SLOs.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's look at that. How did, what was piloted?
Mhm.
What sort of success did we see? What were the problems? What can we do
Mhm.
to better? How's it go? I'd really like to see that sort of information. I'm wondering
Sure.
if we can. And we've gone to the trouble of doing the pilot program.
Mhm.
Let's learn from that. I'm wondering if we could get presentation on that.
They actually did present on that at the end of the first year when we
We
had
did.
that whole team
Yep.
came in and presented.
Right.
Yep. It's been a while since we brought that
But
forward.
we didn't do it,
Yeah.
I don't know that we did it last
No,
year.
we didn't.
I don't
But
believe
it
we
the
did,
first year,
no.
right. And they were very, I thought it was really interesting because they were very positive about the experience. They really felt, first of all, very well prepared to do this because of the kinds of goal setting they've been doing for the last several years in their buildings, especially at the elementary level. And they all found that their kids met growth. I mean, they really, the process ended up being helpful, which is exactly what we had hoped it would be.
Yes, exactly.
At the end of the first year, not
Which
again.
is why giving it, I think we want to, follow up on that and see that. I think it's fundamental to progress here, and continuous improvement going forward. And I think we want to give as much visibility and as much attention as we can,
Mhm.
because it's, I think, fundamental to improving education around here. And see where are we and what are the, and as much as, results, but where are we and what's our implementation, what's the level and depth of our implementation.
Mhm. Great.
I was in a room with all those new teachers, and there was a room full of them. How much has, how many, there 40?
50.
53.
50? I mean, I've never seen so many people, all brand new, fresh, shiny faces right out, ready to roll. What is that? Is that slowing you down? Are they up to speed? How are you keeping up with all of those?
Well, the first thing we did was change our new hire orientation programming this year, specific for educator effectiveness. We included in their new hire workshops the DPI required training that the rest of our staff did last spring. We did that in August with our new hires, and we gave them an overview of the Danielson framework as well, which they hadn't necessarily, unless they would have had that in a previous district or in their college pre-service training. And then from there,
What was your sense? Did they come in with,
um,
how many of them drawing blanks and how many of them had familiarity?
quite a few of them were very familiar with both the educator effectiveness model and the Danielson framework, was the feedback that we got. And then from there, where one of the supports that we tried to bake into our system is to do team SLOs wherever possible. And so a teacher who's new is going to have, first of all, the support of their administrator and their coach in their building, but also, most importantly, they'll have the support of their colleagues on their grade level team or their departmental team as they develop an SLO. And those people will have been with us in the past and can help bring that person along as well.
And if you want to speak just real briefly to, we've talked a lot about the capacity of our principals to handle all those evaluations. I want to talk about how we provide, divvy that up and the support that you and Scott are helping.
Oh, yes, that's right. Well, one of the, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of one of the things that's happened as a result of all of our staffing is the number of teachers in the district who are being formally evaluated this year is much higher than it normally is. So what we did as an administrative group, we just literally went around the table with all of our principals. How many people do you have on your evaluation schedule? And where it was quite high, I'm stepping in and evaluating a number of teachers, for example, at Winnequa School, because Ann's caseload is very high. Scott is evaluating a number of educators in the pupil services group, and we're doing that. One, I think it's good practice for me to be involved in the evaluation process as well. But two, it helps share the load for the administrator in the building, particularly in a building when there's one administrator in elementary level. And then we have the other level of support for that, of course, is the TOSAs in the elementary schools and the educational coach at the high school. So I have, I have 11 or 12 this year. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's important for me just to add a comment. In meeting with the Badger Conference principals during the last couple of years, since the beginning of this whole work with the educator effectiveness, I really want to commend Andrew. I can tell you almost every meeting of the last 2 years, we meet monthly. There's 14 of us that consistently, the conversations that we had around that table and the concerns, and I only can speak to high school level, we've already done the training and have the information that they're stressing over that's coming up. So I want to commend Andrew. This whole thing has been laid out very nicely from a high school perspective for our staff and our leadership. No matter what you do, I get the change is somewhat stressful, but the support we've gotten from his office and from district office as a whole is, I just can't speak high enough to us. This whole thing has gone over very, very well. And I understand we have to get through this year, but in comparison to my colleagues in other districts, and again, I don't mean to bash what they have going on, but I think compliments belong to Andrew and his team for what they've done for us. It's really gone amazingly well. We've really been out in front of it right from the get-go.
Thank you.
Any other questions on educator effectiveness? Okay, then last topic is
Okay.
assessment.
Changes to the assessment system. So this I think we can be brief about. And again, these are things you know before, so they're reminders. As part of the accountability waiver for No Child Left Behind, there are changes in the assessment system for the state. The PALS Early Literacy Screener is now moved up to grades 2, and so that covers grade 4K through 2. We've had 4K, K, and 1 in the past. That's new this year. Biggest change is going to be WKCE will begin to phase out, and the new assessment is called Smarter Balanced. That's a computer-based assessment where WKCE was a paper pencil assessment. So that's in case of reading and math for grades 3 through 8. We will no longer be having WKCE in reading or in math. We'll be using, which happened in the fall, we'll now be having the Smarter Balanced assessment in the spring. I do want to make note that we will still be doing WKCE for science and social studies in those tested grades, at least in the short term. The best information from the state that I've heard is for the next 2 to 3 years, and then they'll perhaps look at it again. So we will keep social studies and science for WKCE. ACT, of course, the state adopted the ACT as the ACT suite as the accountability assessments for high school. And Monona, I was part of a delegation that spoke at the legislative study group a couple of years ago on that. The ACT Aspire suite, which is the replacement of Explore and Plan. Explore and Plan have been retired. They've been replaced with a new assessment called ACT Aspire. And so 9th graders in the fall and the spring will take ACT Aspire, and then 10th graders will also take ACT Aspire in the spring. That'll begin this year. In fact, we are just finishing up the testing schedules for 9th grade Aspire testing, and that'll be going into place in October here. ACT, which we've had the district for a number of years, as you know, district-wide for 11th graders, will be the 11th grade accountability test for all students. And in addition to that, will be new for us is the ACT Work Keys test, which is an assessment of career competencies. That'll be new for us for 11th grade students in the spring. So some of these changes also drove some adjustments to our district level assessments, specifically in grades 7 and 8. Since ACT retired the Explore and Plan tests, which we used to give as part of the EPAS suite, we are now going to be giving ACT Aspire for grades 7 and 8, which is a different assessment. It's the same family, but it's specific for grades 7 and 8 at the middle school. We'll do that in the fall, and there are formative assessment tools that go with that we'll be giving throughout the year for the first time this year. We're going to do that this year and evaluate it and see what we learn and see what goes well and what the challenges are, and then we'll make a decision for how to continue that or refine it for the following year. We will not be giving the MAP assessment school-wide in grade 7 as we have in the past. The reason for that is because Smarter Balance now happens in the spring for those grades, and between Smarter Balance and MAP and wanting to maintain an ACT family assessment, we felt that was just really, really heavy on the assessment load. So to create some balance with that, we gave up school-wide testing for MAP in grade 7, although we will still be using MAP for selected students where we feel like that's a helpful tool for us and for students. So those are the changes to the assessment system, and we'll keep you apprised of how that goes and communicate that. We'll be communicating that with our community and families and students and parents, of course. And then we'll evaluate the results and use the data as best we can to improve teaching and learning.
Jeff, and then Susan, did you have a question? Okay.
Is there any way to see some of these tests, like some sample questions of these tests? I struggle every year as a parent if I want my kids to take these tests or not, because I have no confidence or interest in the results. So I don't know. I mean, I guess, is there any way, I guess that's my other question, is there any way to see, because I don't know if you were, I do some research and I saw about the talking pineapple question. I don't know if you ever saw that. So, I mean, are we putting our kids to a no-win situation with some of these tests? I mean, these tests are written by people who, I mean, they aren't getting, the people that are writing these tests aren't getting accountability tests.
The
So.
smarter, yeah, that's true.
People who wrote them can't pass them, is what he's saying.
Right,
Well, we
right.
don't know if we can or they can or not, right?
Excuse me. There are sample items available for all of these assessments. I'll be happy to follow up with you and get you the information
Cool.
for how to access that. And some of them we have, we're required to do, although interestingly with the ACT, it's a little bit like the state kind of caught up to Monona Grove in terms of the way we've been using the ACT suite here. Word keys will be very new for us. That's not something we've done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, we just have to see what happens. But yes, I'll be happy to get you
And do you
information on
look
how
at
they're.
them? I mean, do you guys look at them?
Mhm.
Okay, you
Yep.
see, you get to see, so like, to
Yep.
know what our kids are looking at.
Yep. In fact, one of the things, one of the pieces of we had a training provided by ACT in mid to late August for Aspire. How do you set it up? How do you log into the assessment? What are the organizational things you need to do? How do you need to prepare students, not necessarily for the content on the test, because that's a function of their classroom instruction, but how to handle a computer-based test. And there are essentially practice tests with sample items for ACT Aspire. Same with MAP, that are accessible to anybody who wants to see that. So,
Okay.
mhm.
Susan?
There are just a couple things. One of the things that Deep had mentioned in one of our workshops was that it might change our timing on when we get the ACT. So, is that spring and fall?
Well, timing on an ACT for us is
For
pretty
the
consistent. I think for the
11th graders?
11th graders happens in March.
Okay.
So that's very similar to what it's been in the past. It's pretty close to what it's been in the past. The big change in timing is going to be WKCE being in the fall, and now we'll have Smarter Balance in the spring. So that's a big change. WKCE being the state assessment for grades 3 through 8 and then 10. That's really a big change. But the ACT schedule is pretty close to what it was in before. And one of the reasons for that is because it's also the state accountability assessment in Illinois, and they want to have, it's the same assessment, so you don't want to have students in Illinois taking it a week before neighboring state in Wisconsin takes it, so they try and keep all of that together.
And we're going to be getting that out to parents?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. We're updating all of our parent communication on assessment, and we'll be getting that out here.
Because that was one of the things they talked about in this meeting,
Right.
making sure that we get that out. And then, again, one of the, and I know Jeff wasn't on the board when we actually did this,
Excuse me.
5 years, maybe 6 years ago, when we
Yeah.
actually implemented ACT for all students in the middle school experiences with that. And what the research tells you is that that builds an experience for you, and as you take that experience more times, it improves your ability to do it. So it's not just taking a test, it's learning how to doing problem solving in that environment. I'm not saying it's the best way, but it is supposed to help them better understand the process. And what they say is if you have a kid who takes it in 11th grade, who's never taken it before, that may be an A or B student and they may not score very well on it just because they're not familiar with the environment or the experience. And then the other thing that's good news that I should tell you, that remember one of the discussions we were having was about reports at the end and what we wanted as a board to put in and which reports we wanted to include and not include. Well, just so you know, we started with 9 items and that's what we were talking about last week. 2 of those were actually policy directed, so you can just pull those up right off the list. We're down to 7. 2 very clearly were just covered tonight, so that takes 2 more off the list. So, you know, if we're going to have any more prioritization, it takes us down to 5, and it may even be less than that after you look at these 2 reports.
That was
And
actually the
depth
plan.
of these reports.
Just so you know. Well, and weren't we giving Explore and Plan in the spring? So really, Aspire in the spring
Aspire,
is not much.
well, what we weren't doing in the past was doing, if we would have done WKCE in the spring at 7th and 8th grade.
Well, right, but we didn't, yeah.
Yeah, so
But
that's
we
where
didn't- I mean, but in terms of what teachers actually use, you don't really,
Oh,
I mean,
I see
you
what you
really
mean, yeah.
use the
Yeah.
Explore and Plan results, as I assume we'll be able to use the Aspire. I assume they're gonna be similar.
Right.
And so it was more than just the value of practice for those. It was that they do really measure skills that kids
That's
need.
right.
At least that was what I kept hearing from our staff.
Very
And
much
that's
so.
why we pushed it down to 7th grade and started giving it. And we actually did use it to tweak our curriculum when we saw gaps, when teachers would review it and see that a lot of kids were missing in one area. We would look at our curriculum and say, okay, what do we need to address this particular skill at this level? So we have found them very useful. So I'm hoping that the Aspire test turns
That's-
out to be equally useful. And I'm assuming it will be because it's made by the same folks, isn't
That's
it?
right.
It's just a
It is.
different.
It's just an
right,
update, it's an
different version.
updated version.
And the other question I had, so
Computer-based,
we're not
yeah.
using Dibbles at all anymore?
No, we still use
Okay,
Dibbles,
we
but
do
that,
still.
I didn't list that here because
it's
that's not a
state,
change.
right. Because
So,
I'd always
yeah.
heard from the teachers that was much more useful than PALS.
I've heard that as well, yeah.
fact,
An
they'd
interesting
like to
thing about
get rid
those
of
2
PALS, but-
assessments is they're both early literacy screeners. Just the nature of the design of the PALS assessment is, it's really only designed to identify students who are in need of really intensive intervention. And Dibbles does that as well, but also identifies students with a lot more nuance.
Right.
And so when you hear that, that's
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 what
why,
I understood.
yeah.
And I know they were pushing to use that as a state test instead, but there are other schools
Yeah.
that don't use Dibbles, so anyway,
Right,
that was the
there's-
answer I got when I raised that with DPN.
right.
Okay.
Right.
I know.
Now that ACT is state required, are they, maybe this is a question for Jerry, are they picking up the cost or are we still paying for
They pick up the cost.
it? So we don't have to pay for it anymore?
We will continue to fund Aspire for grades 7 and 8
Right.
at the
That's
district
excellent,
cost
yeah.
because that's a choice that we make.
Yep.
But the state will pick up ACT and WorkKeys and Aspire for 9th and 10th as well.
That's nice.
So much cost savings.
It's 15.
It's not as
Yeah,
much
about that,
as.
yeah.
15,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not, yeah.
But it's something.
Yeah.
That's, I can,
Dean, that's
Just
a-
a couple of questions.
excuse me.
The state package today, you and I believe it was Paul, you testified in favor of that for the Legislative Study Committee. How much of what you testified to that day is now state policy?
All of it. What's in all of it and a little bit more that I actually wish they hadn't done, but we're doing Aspire in the fall of the 9th grade. And the rationale that I heard for that was because you can't get a growth measurement from the 8th grade Smarter Balance test to the 9th grade Aspire test because they're 2 completely different and unrelated assessments. And so they put 9th grade, fall and spring, and then 10th grade and so forth. But with that exception, everything that we testified to is now in place here.
And the other question is that there's much greater emphasis and use and reliance on formative testing. To some extent, that's used systematically. That's a new concept in most schools, is it not?
Well,
How is that going?
I think it's going well. We've always had formative assessment practices in place. I think what we've developed is our ability to just to do better work with formative assessment. We put one of the challenges at the secondary level is, an individual teacher at a elementary school will have a classroom of 22, 23 students, and then as they move, share students a little bit. But of course, that number is much larger at the secondary level. So one of the challenges for us was just managing those data for formative assessments. We've got an assessment system in place at the high school now that is a technology solution that helps us address that, and we've had that in place now for a year and a half. And I work very closely with Dr. Brost and Nicole Northester on formative assessment practices with high school, and I'd say that's really expanding and doing a nice job. The other piece of formative assessment, though, is good classroom practice of understanding where your students are in the moment during instruction. And my experience with that is rehearsal. So when I'm rehearsing a music group, what am I hearing in terms of their performance that immediately translates into an instructional response? Teachers do that as well. That's an informal way of doing formative assessment. They do that through questioning. They do that through really short
The
quizzes.
fundamentals are its difference between, say, they got it right or they got it wrong, to the instructional components which may go into reteaching.
Right.
Is that part of it?
That's exactly right. Yep, exactly.
And actually, to that point about the fall 9th grade test, that was if you'll recall, our board resolution to the WSB Delegate Assembly last year was to allow, for DPI to allow a waiver for districts like us who will be giving the Aspire test in the spring of 8th grade. And it was approved by the Delegate Assembly as a lobbying point. And that was added by legislators at the last minute. That was not a DPI recommendation.
Yeah.
And so they will lobby for that, but because it's in statute, that may or may not be successful. There weren't a lot of districts that gave the EPAS test, the Explore test, in 8th grade, spring of 8th grade, so it was really directed at districts who don't. And then also those unified high school districts where, they have different feeder districts coming into them. But there was no logical reason why they couldn't give us a waiver, but whether that'll get anywhere. I'm sure it's not high on anybody's.
WKC be continued either.
Yeah.
That's something. So at the high school, we have 5 testing windows this year. We have Aspire for 9th graders and WKC with science and social studies for sophomores. Then we'll have Aspire for freshmen and sophomores. Then we'll have the ACT, and then we'll get your keys. So we have 5 testing windows this year.
And that was the point we made, that it was really excessive.
Yeah.
And they, as I say, the Delegate Assembly approved it, and they got it, and there's some support at DPI, but whether that'll.
We'll leave most of it in our block schedule, so it's not going to be overly disruptive except for ACT, but it's a lot of testing.
It is a lot of testing.
Right. And we don't need the fall one, obviously, in our district. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, then next is board reports. Susan, Monona Grove Education Foundation.
The Monona Grove Education Foundation met on September 9th, 2014, and thank you very much, Joyce, for this posting for us. They did a quick update on the John Clement Award Donation Challenge. The Clement family has indicated that approximately $10,000 was received for the MG Education Foundation through the memorial service for John Clement. And the Gerke family is matching contributions up to $5,000. So there's, again, there's discussion about permanently endowing this award and finding an opportunity for continuing to honor John Clement's legacy in this district. There was discussion relating to work on the new district website in integration with the foundation. So Dan and the foundation have been working on looking at their material and updating it. And as usual, if there's any work to be done, it was assigned to Joyce and Dan for posting. So sorry about that. They finished their brochures for the foundation and are going to be distributing those. Those are at the printers. Jennifer Pickle from the foundation spoke to the teachers in relation to the foundation at the Teachers Back to School Day. And the update on the November 15th gala, the fundraiser. Again, I would encourage you all to buy tickets to support the foundation. It's November 15th, 2014. The plan for the program includes, again, the teachers who had grants will be giving a brief conclusion to their grants and the work that they did with the grants in the school district. And then there will be a roast of MG football coach Mike Stassi. There are a whole bunch of neat auction items, including a great big huge picture of Jessie Dyer. I did ask her to give a stick because I thought it'd be more fun to have a stick than a picture, but that's up to you. But there are a lot of neat things. There's also going to be a dessert auction for those of you who really like that. And their sponsor letters have gone out, and they've gotten some nice responses from a whole lot of people, including the Princeton Clinky Cleaners, who worked with the district for a long time. Tables are being purchased, including one for the football staff, and Eat Out for Education is kind of ongoing work. They have Fat Jack's Black Bear Pizza Oven, and publicity is pending. And the teacher grant process, the preliminary budget is about $8,000. Teachers, are you listening? Did you hear that? It opens in mid-October. Please submit grants. They're going to try and update the website so that you can do it interactively. And they're still soliciting and looking for new board members for the foundation. Terry Groves, because of her new job and her time commitments, did have to resign from the foundation. So again, that link, they'd love to fill that. And they'll be reviewing scholarship and award policy and procedure in October. And that's scheduled for the 14th at 8 a.m.
And how does one buy tickets for the gala? Is that on the MG, is it on the foundation website?
I figured all that out.
Okay.
There is a
Because I've never seen
flyer.
that mentioned in
I
any of
know,
them. Okay.
there's a flyer, and it effectively takes you to Jennifer's
Email?
Email.
So-
So
Yeah,
they were updating the flyer,
Yeah.
which will tell you how to do it. Otherwise, I would have one for
Okay.
everybody here tonight. But again, I went to Susan and I said, you have to help me buy a table. So
One of the challenges that they're waiting is they're trying to get a system so that people can use credit
you can
cards.
do it electronically.
And so they
Oh,
want
I
to
see.
get that worked out before they send out, okay, here's how
Okay.
you buy tickets. So
Okay.
that,
Just like buying the
Okay,
tickets for
right.
the musicals.
Right.
They wanted to
Take a
put
seat
it
or
on
whatever
the
that's
line.
I'm looking for a square or
Yeah.
PayPal or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, you'd think they could plug into the auditorium system, but maybe they can't. I don't know.
Yeah, and again.
Okay, we'll wait for
We'll have
that.
an update for you as soon as we get that. We'll have flyers, and I'll probably send that out. I'm sure they'll be using whatever publicity is available.
Sounds good. Dean?
Your report has that they're looking to fully endow the Clement.
They're discussing it. It
Okay.
was a
Do
discussion.
they mention how much they need to,
No.
in their judgment?
They are just, did you get any more detail on that?
No,
What
I
they
didn't.
said was, in the meeting, was they were discussing it. So they didn't give us any specifics at all about that discussion, because I think it's still fairly new, and I'm not sure how much of it.
Those are the two scholarships, the boy and the girl scholar athlete thing, right?
I'm not sure. In fact,
Yeah.
they talked about, they're still in discussion over student scholarships.
Yeah. So I think they will be, when they will be, as it mentioned, the solicitation coming up from the future about what their needs are. And
I know, it's so
I'll walk
hard.
up the street and ask.
It's
Yeah.
hard for me because you've been
That'd be
going
easier.
for so long, you have all that background. I just, kind of get what
Well,
you
if they want two scholarships at $500 each, you're gonna have to have a base of around 20,000.
Right.
To have that yield.
That's great to know. Again, we didn't get that information at that meeting.
no.
Okay, thank you. Then the next item is the Personnel Committee report, and even though Jessica is not able to be here tonight, Dan, did you just want to say a couple things about it?
Yeah, the one item was just that the committee met to discuss bargaining strategies. So we have a tentative date to begin negotiations with the MGEF, not confirmed yet, and hopefully that will take place sometime soon. And this is something that the entire board had discussed previously. It's just a matter of getting together and make sure everyone's on the same page with regard to that. One thing I guess I can announce is that we're looking at having, in addition to formal bargaining, some meet and confer session to talk about, other issues as well. So as those get scheduled, we'll certainly have, more updates for the board.
That'll be the Personnel Committee, so.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have any unfinished business, I'm
I
sorry.
guess
Oh.
there's no unfinished business listed, but I was hoping, and maybe I should have said something earlier, probably earlier in the week, but unfinished business, I was hoping for an update on the transportation. Or we're gonna do that later, or is there a plan?
Superintendent's report.
Yeah, we could have done it then, or we can do it, we can just get one in early October, I guess, at the committee of the whole. Because we don't have that on the agenda, but, I mean, it could have been a superintendent report. I don't know if we're kind of out of kilter now, but.
I would comment, it was really nice when an email comes to the board to be able to clearly see it was all responded to. That was really helpful. Because then we know if, for any reason, if that parent comes directly to us, we know they've been responded to at all levels. So I really appreciated the principal letting us see they had responded, as well as Nelson. That was very helpful. And it looked relatively neat.
And I did send her a response, but I didn't do the reply all key.
Yeah.
I mean, I always do, so you can always
I
count on
know.
that. Dan always does
I
also
know.
when it comes to the
I know.
board, so you can have confidence that
You're
they are all
responding as well.
responded
Yeah.
to, and
But this was
sometimes
really
I do a
nice.
reply, but you're right, today it was nice to see that handled so quickly, and I think the parent was appreciative
Yes.
as well.
Particularly based on the appearances last time. And yes, thank you very much for keeping us in the loop.
Okay.
So
I think it'd be appropriate to make note of what the questions were, to make sure that in the next board meeting, we have an update on the things that have happened, these, that are still ongoing, and
Right.
how they've gone, so,
Hopefully by then there won't be ongoing.
yeah. Okay, thank you, correct you. How they've, yeah.
How they've
changes
been
have
dealt with, right.
Yeah, thank
Would
you.
you put on that list too, because it sounds like they were, I was under the impression at the last meeting, and this is a question to make sure, it's not a discussion,
Yeah.
that he's gonna put that on. I was under the impression that there was just basically one major change that was still gonna be done, and that was the Winnequa route. But it sounds like we're still making changes, and that may not be accurate, so if you just,
Yeah,
Any changes and any other steps that have been
that
occurred.
have occurred in the last 2 weeks from the meeting, and anything that's anticipated, that would be great.
Okay. Then on to new business, finally, for those who have been waiting. Discussion possible approval of the Monona Grove High School French Club trip to France in June of 2015.
Should have put that.
Thank you for waiting.
Leah has been doing this a while, and she does a nice job of trying to make sure that all the French students who participate through French 3 at least one time in their high school career have an opportunity, if they wish to participate in this trip. And so I think information was forwarded to you. Leah can give a brief overview if you'd like, and then we can answer questions.
What I sent on was kind of the nuts and bolts. That this year we're proposing a 10-day trip. That was the same actually as our trip in 2010. That kind of tops out, I think, the expense-wise, as long of a trip as I can propose these days, because the trips have gotten really pricey. So it's a 10-day trip. Students will be able to stay with a French family, a host family. This company is very nice. It's located in Minneapolis. We've traveled with them for many, many years, even going back to my predecessor. I traveled with this company as a high schooler a few years ago, about 8 years ago. Give or take. They've been around a while, and they are a student travel company just to France. They don't do any other destinations, so it's their specialty. And they have offices right on the ground in Paris, so it's kind of nice for just an extra layer of accountability and whatnot while we're there. We would be going in June of 2015, right after school is out. And actually, as I was sitting here tonight, I just got an email from someone at VIE saying it looks like we might be leaving anywhere between June 11th and the 20th, which means I'll need to get out of my final exams, Paul. Talk about that later. We won't know a lot of specifics in terms of flight times and things like that until, I believe, about January is usually when they get back to us on those and start really firming things up. Students stay with the host family, and then when we regroup, we go and do a tour of usually at least 1 or 2 regions, and then we fly home. 10 days goes by pretty quickly. Like Paul was saying, meaning the whole World Languages Department, Spanish took their trip this summer. They also really like to require the kids to have at least 3 years under their belt so that they have some independence. And their language skills are at a level that maybe affords them some little bit more communicative mobility, as it were. And also just some more maturity overall, age-wise maybe. And what else I put down here? I attached a quote sheet, and we'll be offering some fundraising this year for the kids. I will say that the numbers are not what they used to be, certainly not when I remember way back to when I traveled. There were quite a few kids who went, but we're happy. We already have 5 kids who are looking to go, and we're hoping to add some more. So that's about what I have on it right now. And
How do you raise money?
well, what I put on here was we do some fundraisers. I, as an advisor, as the extracurricular, we're taking donations tonight. I'll pass around the beret. I put down that we have a crinkle sale this fall. We'll have another one in the spring. We're hoping to have a dessert night.
It's a lot of dessert.
It is a lot of dessert. It is a lot of money, and we tell kids, for the kids who are seniors who are going, I always tell them, be smart about how and when you schedule your graduation party, and maybe in lieu of, make it part of your graduation gift, some money for your trip. But those are the fundraisers that we have organized and on the docket right now.
Do you have kids on free and reduced lunch that would qualify for the trip, and if so, how do they get?
We don't support, for these kind of trips, we've not ever supported students out of school budget just because it's so expensive. Same way I thought it's when the band will travel to New York City and so on, for those trips that are very expensive. So we've always helped take care of more local kind of things, but other than providing students an opportunity to get involved in fundraising and raise their own money, we haven't had a system in place for these more expensive kind of adventures.
My Rotary Club supports the Chinese club at Madison Memorial High School, and our funds go to we support 1 or 2 kids that have had Chinese for at least 3 years and that sort of thing. I don't know if you could try some service
That's
clubs
great.
that might be committed to something like that.
It'd be wonderful. The issue becomes just it's become so expensive that them giving that much money to really make a difference in 1 or 2 kids rather than having their money spread over a number of kids is just a challenge. But anything like that, we would certainly welcome.
I don't know how many of you had students that have had the ability to have this experience, but ours did. And do you then go with other schools? What they did that year, there were probably at least 10 kids, Monona alone.
Tana, yeah.
And so to be able to make up the composition, do you actually do that with other schools?
Yes, exactly.
I think we went with.
This will be my fourth trip with students, and all of them we've always been paired with another school or 2 or even 3 groups. The company, just as well as other companies, they quote you a price based on, let's say, a full touring bus, for the touring portion of the tour. So yes, exactly. They try to, and that's one of the reasons why we have to plan it so early out, because they have to, figure out which groups can travel together in order to fill out those numbers, to be able to quote us the price that they eventually quote us. When we went in 2010, our last trip, we were about 10 students on that trip, and myself and one other teacher. And we were, I want to say we're at least with 2, if not 3 other schools. And some of them had larger groups and some of them were a real small group like us.
Our students
Yeah.
that year thought that was a really nice experience. A
Yeah.
nice mix of students. And then, do they go outside of Paris at all? 'Cause
We will.
Our students did, and I didn't see that on the schedule.
Yeah, the way it reads on here is I actually just kind of used the itinerary from VIE's website, but they have more specifics as we get closer, again, to the trip happening. They really fill in the details of the day-by-day events. But, for example, on here, what I sent on day 2 to 6 is with the families. And then there's a couple of days spent in Paris. And then if we do a trip to the northern regions, like we did in 2010, we stayed with a French family in and around. No, we didn't do a family stay that year, actually, because we teamed up with the art club, actually, that year because of the economics of the time when we proposed it. Was really, we figured hard to get numbers. And so we thought we would have too many students participating that didn't have French skills, so we just did a strictly touring type of thing. But when we've done this itinerary before, they generally stay with a host family in the Parisian suburbs, and then we do a tour of Brittany and parts of Normandy and a little part of what's called Centre, which is a lot of the chateau and a lot of the castles and valleys.
I think our kids went to Nice, which was.
We did that trip in 2003. That was the trip I took before 2010, and that was a longer trip, and it was wonderful. But again, if we were to do a trip like that today, it's really too bad. It's the airfare that's really the big chunk. It would be upwards of $4,000 to do that
And
trip.
do you do a kind of a full assessment on the family visits? Because I know those were all across the board. All across the board.
I don't do an assessment of them. I mean, I look to see who they get paired with, but VIE, I think that's another advantage of this company, being a smaller company that just specializes in student travel to France, is because they have had an office in Paris with a whole staff and a host family coordinator that does just that works with schools in finding host families that are appropriate for this kind of experience. And they're families that, similar to families here, that really seek out that experience for their family. And so they do some pretty thorough checking. And I did have a parent ask me about background checks. And I did ask VIE this, and I learned something that in France, there's some legality issues to background checks in certain instances. And so what we think of, and we're very sensitive to background checks, is not something they do, but we've never had an issue with that. Like I said, most of the families that are drawn to do this kind of experience and feed a student, another adolescent, for 4 days, are generally people who are really wanting that experience. So does that answer your question?
It just seemed like 5 out of 7 days seems like a long time with the family. But again, those are just based on different people's experiences with that. Sometimes the family takes you because they want to learn English.
Oh, right.
But anyway,
Well,
it's a mix.
Yeah,
It's a nice experience.
there used to be family stays. Again, when the trip was longer, it was almost a full 2 weeks, like it was in 2003. We were up to 14 or 15 days total. Now they just stay about 4 nights, so it's really just a pretty small, pretty short experience with the host family.
Dean?
Is the France trip much more valuable than, say, a cheaper trip, like to Quebec or to the French Caribbean or something like that?
Cost efficiency, I think, to the Caribbean it would be quite a bit more expensive, but I have for years been sort of just subtly proposing to students who are in French Club, because these are students who are in French Club as an extracurricular activity and also are taking French. I've proposed a trip to Quebec, not formally, but just to feel them out. And they overwhelmingly always want to vote to go to France. I mean, that for them is the ultimate.
If I had a choice of
Yeah,
We used to
but
offer the variance. It would be
every
Paris one
year.
year in Quebec, and actually, so one son went to Paris and one went to Quebec, and he loved
Loved both of them, yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
And I am thinking about going back to proposing that. It would just be, I guess, a question of figuring out the frequency, if because right now we're on kind of an every 3-year schedule. Spanish does their trip every 3 years, and we've offered our trip every 3 years. So maybe that's something that I'm open to ideas of, when would I offer that? Would I offer that the year following the trip, or?
I think my children had Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
I just think the difference, taking $1,500 roughly in airfares, well, that's a big chunk.
I agree, and like I said, I
realize the
propose
goal
it to
is a lot
students.
different though, too.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Then do we need a motion on this, right?
We do.
We need a motion for approval of the French trip as presented for 2015. Anyone care to make that motion?
Can board members be escorts on that?
No, we ask that every year, and we always get turned down.
And how much French can you
Yeah.
speak?
As do all the teachers who have emailed me
Right,
already this year.
I'm sure there's a long list. So could I have a motion for approval of the Monona Grove High School French trip to France in June of 2015?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for waiting.
Was there a time constraint on this one? I just wondered because we didn't get it at the last meeting, and then we were taking.
Well,
action.
it's pretty routine, so
Okay.
we just
Okay.
made the decision to just have, we didn't want her to come twice.
Yeah.
We thought
How many
there was no
kids do you
point.
have that want to go already?
I'm just trying to be respectful of the process.
Okay.
And you could get the downtown Rotary could fund the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That would be good.
Go for that, Dean.
All right, the next item on the agenda is
A lot of high schools applying.
discussion and possible approval of a resolution authorizing temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $5 million, issuance of taxable tax and revenue anticipatory promissory notes, and participation in the PMA levy and aid anticipation notes program.
Okay. This is another item that's routine that the board does annually, so I'll turn over to Jared to provide the details.
Yeah, so the short version of it is it's our cash flow borrowing program that we belong to. A couple of years ago, we had changed and we left the Wisconsin cash flow borrowing program and teamed up with 5 other school districts. Those school districts surrounding Dane County would be Wanakee and Sun Prairie. Then we also teamed up with Oconomowoc and then 2 other districts, Menominee Falls and DC Effers. And what we can do is we can go out to the market and receive a lower interest rate. What happens tonight is the board approves the resolution, allows us to enter into the borrowing. We last year we saw less than 0.5% of interest that we ended up paying back, so we've seen some savings there on our budgets. But then the other part is that we're still independent. We don't take on the responsibility if they default. We are only responsible for our part, and we have. This is the same resolution. Squirrel and Brady, legal counsel, bond counsel, has looked over this to make sure it's acceptable. So once you approve this resolution, then we will go out to the market. We won't come back with bids. It's just proving that we can enter into this.
Okay, so I would ask for a motion to approve a resolution authorizing temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $5 million, issuance of taxable tax and revenue anticipation promissory notes, and participation in the PMA levy and aid anticipation notes program.
So moved.
Second.
So moved and second, and this requires a roll call vote. So if there are no questions, Susan?
Aye.
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 All ayes, the motion carries. Thank you. Then the next item on the agenda is future agenda items, and basically now I have that we'd like an update on the transportation at the October meeting. I anyone have any?
I'll just make one note. If you recall, last meeting, we had discussion regarding communication plan and possible services. You know, so it was not on the agenda tonight. It will be the next meeting at the committee of the whole for continued discussion. There was some information that some of the board members had asked for, so we haven't forgotten about that. We'll be coming back to that as well.
Seeing none, then we have our future meetings listed here. The annual meeting, being the next one on October 1st at 7 PM. That'll be here in the large room, I assume. And seeing no further business, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We are adjourned. So you need some signatures on that resolution?
Do you know they're doing test questions?
The resolution?
Especially could be an answer to the question.
Oh, really?
Okay, sorry.